This morning. Thanks for joining. This tree identification presentation is very much aimed at beginners and hopefully a bit of fun as well. But first, I just wanted to run through the Growing for Garnet project that Emma mentioned that we're working with. Delivering. So this has been ongoing for the last 2 to 3 years, and it's kind of taken us beyond just trees and looking at a whole range of kind of wild plants, native wild flowers that are to be found in the area. So it's all about engaging local people, whether it's school children, adults, people with sort of special needs, whatever, to get them out in their surroundings. And that's been very valuable, of course, during lockdown. So, we've been leading guided walks, different places, a whole range of very contrasting places right through the Garnock Valley, where there's areas that are rich in sort of botanical interest, to allow people to kind of look and understand and learn about their native wild flora. So we've brought in some botanical experts that have helped provide some plant ID for people, and we've introduced some art sort of elements to it as well, which has been really nice, working with Remode in Lochwinnoch, people drawing flowers and various things. So this is during the spring months, these walks have been taking place. But then we've moved on into the autumn, and it's all about then seed collection. So the idea of the project's trying to propagate a whole range of kind of plants based on the ones that people have seen in the spring. So then taking groups out, we've worked with the junior groups with SWT down in Irvine, taking them through the reserves, collecting whole range of different seeds. With the idea of then hopefully growing them. So this has been taking place last year in our nursery at Bishopton, processing seeds, sowing them, propagating them. But that's been challenging, and since lockdown and various things, we've been really restricted what we can do. But what we've since done, and we found it to be working quite well, is engage people at home to grow plants themselves at home, and then sort of supply them back. It's a great way for people to get involved. And ultimately, of course, it's all about then getting plants back into the countryside. So we've been targeting places that could really benefit from enrichment of different species. So plant a whole range of things, whether it's bluebells in new woodlands, or devil's bit scabious and oxidase, or whatever it might be in different sites that could benefit. Here at Dalry Station, the group have been planting some there. We've been up in the hills at Dalry planting aspen trees. So it's been a real range of projects. So it's all about enhancement and, as I say, engaging people. And really this tree identification presentation kind of feeds in nicely with that, because we're trying to, open people's eyes to what's around them. So it's very much, as I say, aimed at beginners and hopefully a wee bit of fun. So, there's no way I can cover 33 of the native British species in sort of 40 minutes. And we've got a whole range of introduced species, of course, as well, particularly in this area, that have become naturalised in the country. So I'm going to focus, first of all, just on broadleaves, okay? We're going to leave out the conifers. There are only 3 native conifers in Scotland, a whole range, obviously, of introduced ones. And we're going to then focus on the 9 probably most commonly seen native and non-native trees in the Garnock Connections area. And that's the list there. Okay, these are the trees we're going to look at. Okay, so how do you identify a tree? Well, let's start from the beginning. I think my own personal case is that my own personal situation was I didn't have any formal training. I don't have an ecology or forestry degree. Really, it was all just about getting involved hands-on in environmental projects and just kind of learning intuitively as I went, and just seeing and discovering particular features that kind of stood out for me, that helped me identify trees. And I think, it's all very well using guides, and they're very valuable, as well as, of course, all the modern apps that we have now. So you can really cheat, and you know, and they're really useful. But yeah, it's getting your eye in, and the more you're out in the woods, the better. Ultimately, you know, you just got to get to know the trees. The more often you look, but also the closer you look, the better. And you know, trees change with age and also where they grow, and that really does complicate matters. So I think, you know, it's all about just getting out through the year and just keep looking, and challenge yourself. The context is important as well. I mean, look around you. Where are you? You know, what is the habitat? Because that will determine to a large degree what kind of trees you will find in a particular area. Is it a mature woodland, or is it a wetland, or up in the hills? You know, even a brownfield sort of urban site. You know, that's going to dictate what grows, because certain trees grow together in particular situations. Then, of course, you can start coming into the different features that really you can start picking out. I mean, the obvious thing is leaves, and in summer, you know, that's the first go-to kind of feature that people would automatically turn. Maybe then bark, that's a harder one, I find. I don't generally think bark is a particularly easy one, and twigs probably even less so. But remember that trees, like plants, flower, and they can be very distinctive. In certain species anyway. And of course the seed pods, or how they're presented, also can be very distinct, but that's a very seasonal aspect. Now during these winter months, of course, potentially it's very challenging, and people think, oh, you know, impossible to identify trees in winter. But then again, you know, without leaves, it's easier to look at the form of the trees, and trees do have quite distinctive forms and branching, you know, so that's something to look at. But often you know, you look beneath a tree, you will see the leaves still on the ground, probably, especially late autumn into winter. And as long as you're sure that those leaves came from the same tree, you know, then that's a great help. Of course, if there's different species about, that's a different matter. But often, you know, at this time of year, you're still looking for fruit and well, seeds. Yeah, fruit or seeds hanging and remaining on the trees. And some trees actually retain their leaves quite well on into the winter. So that's another help. So don't despair at this time of year. You know, there's still a lot you can do, and there's still a lot to look at. And of course, at this time, it's more the twigs and the bark that can help as well. So, for me, anything about trying to remember things is all about using tricks, isn't it? I mean, I do this day to day with various things, work, my personal life. It's all about finding little clever kind of connections to make. And to me, the more ridiculous, the better. So there's going to be a few ridiculous sort of memory tricks I'm going to throw in, but maybe it just might help you with the ID. So, as I mentioned before, let's try and distinguish different settings for different trees, okay, and different types of tree. So I thought we'd start with, you know, the high forest species. You know, you can think of this as the climax woodland, the big native wildwood that would have been here. The big old ancient trees. These trees, you know, the ones that ultimately are the building blocks of the forest, okay? So you're looking for tall trees, big, robust, wide girth, often more than 40 centimetres, you know. And we have remnant woodlands around here, whether it's the reserve at the RSPB here or all down the Garnet Valley, small patches, okay. So these, in terms of your native species, these would be the oak and the ash and the elm. These are your high forest species, okay. But you do have a lot of non-natives as well, and really the part and parcel of the local flora. So your sycamores and your beeches together, okay? So those five are building blocks of your forest. There are things like horse chestnut and hornbeam as well. Hornbeam, a lot less likely, so we're not going to cover that just now. And horse chestnut, well, I imagine a lot of people can identify your stereotypical Concord tree. Okay. Then you have your pioneers, okay? These are your early successional trees, the nimble little trees that spew seed everywhere, and they're really quick at colonizing areas. They don't need fertile ground, okay? So any open ground, disturbed ground, these seeds will get in, and quickly you'll get regeneration. It's your alders and your birches and your rowans and your willows, okay? Often short-lived trees. You're not going to get big, ancient-looking trees with these species, okay? But these are the important trees that start stimulating soil production, okay, and really in open ground. So they don't need all those important fungus and soil biology to survive, okay? They're happy out in the bare hill or on a degraded site. Often they can be quite bushy in form. Yes, you can get taller, slender trees. They're fast growing, and they might only live, 60, 70 years. I put aspen in there as well. That's our speciality, but I'm not actually going to cover aspen just because it's one of your rarer ones, although we're doing our best to try and sort of reverse that locally. So pioneers. And then coming right down, you've got your smaller trees or bushes. So I suppose your understory of the high forest, okay? So these things would, exist together with your high forest species, but also sometimes in the open as well. The one we're going to look at today is elder, but you've also got things like hawthorn and blackthorn, your thorny species, okay? So again, perhaps easier to identify simply because they're thorny. And you've got your hollies, which I think everyone can identify. Very relevant for this time of year, so I'm sure that's an easy one. And there's hazel as well. We'll be familiar with hazelnuts. Again, a small tree or bush. Often, these things are to be found in hedgerows, particularly in the sort of lowland farming farmlands and countryside around here, as well as within in the woodlands. They also form scrub with your pioneers, so that sort of mixed together. So I mentioned before about the setting. Okay, this is what to look at. Different settings. I mean, a particularly distinctive one and one characteristic of the Garnet Connections area is the wetlands. Okay, we have a lot of wetlands here. We get a lot of rain. We know all about it here in Loch Winnoch. So these are the wet-loving plants that can tolerate water. A lot of trees, plants do not like to be waterlogged. Okay, and they need water, yes, but too much water can be a killer for a lot of trees. Okay, but these particular ones don't mind. Alder, your key wet-loving species. Okay, and willow. Think wind in the willows. Okay, down by the riverside or on the near the bogs or the wetlands. Okay, these are your species, and also to a slightly lesser extent, maybe your downy birch. Those three together, and we call wet woodlands Carr woodlands. It's just a particular name we give to these places. And aspen should be in there as well, but as I say, less common. But again, those four together. And on the reserve here in Loch Winnoch, those are your kind of key wetland species. Here, again, fairly local sites. We've got Loch Lebo Reserve, managed by the SWT. And here's plenty of Carr woodlands. Okay, we kind of open ground with rushes and reeds, grassland, these little bushes. Okay, now from a distance, to me, that's shouting out willow. Okay, kind of roundish bushes, clumps, open ground, and then some alders and birches. Now, don't worry too much just now, but just illustrating what kind of form they take and how they grow together. And then you could look at the ridge behind your drier ground where you would find your high forest species. Okay, so they're together. You've got that contrast. And here's the clumps of alders here. And then uplands. I mean, we've got plenty of uplands in this area. And typically in any uplands in Scotland, you would find your birch. That's a good tough tree. Birches will grow anywhere pretty much, and rowan similarly. And willows, certain willows, and I'll come on to willows in more detail later, with a whole range of different willow species, can be very complicated, but certain types of willow, yes, love the uplands, and very much in the highlands, you know, willows will be found right up to the tree line. Some of your montane dwarf willows, something we're not going to look at today. So willows can be extremely varied. I mean, they've evolved to have a huge diversity within that species. I'll come on to look at that. And to a lesser extent, elders as well. You also in the uplands find aspen. That's a really good, tough pioneer and upland tree as well. It'll grow anywhere. And to a lesser extent, your hazels. So those of you kind of upland trees, similar again to your wetland trees, but with rowan as a key additional species in there, and hazel and elder. So you know, typically you'd be looking, here's the Renfrewshire Heights. You have just very small remnants of woodland up the cliffs and little gullies. Your rowans typically growing on their own, you know, just where the birds can spread the seed about. And sometimes, if we're lucky and deer numbers are low and there's a decent enough seed source, we get natural regeneration, which will often be birch coming and creating a scrub way up, you know, it can be quite high with poor soils through the heather, you know, the birch can come up and the odd willow. So just giving you a feel for the, you know, the different landscapes we can find. So you've established the kind of setting, right? Then we need to look at particular distinctive features which can characterize certain trees together, okay? Now, the obvious one, again, starting with leaves in the summer, easiest way, okay? We have certain types of leaf category, if you like. So starting with the compound leaves. Compound leaves just basically mean you've got lots of little leaflets within the single leaf, okay? And this is quite an easy one. So, you know, if you find a compound leaf, it's either a rowan, an ash, or an elder. But those three species are very different, okay? So just finding a compound leaf should go a long way. Rowans and ash are very common, and that's led to the rowans often being called a mountain ash, but they're actually not related at all. Rowans are very distinct because they've got the berries and they're the small, you know, pioneer upland tree, unlike the high forest ash. So, you know, we'll come on to look at them in more detail. And then the elder are very different again, because as I said before, it's a small bush, you know, with berries, etc. So, you know, look for these compound leaves. The other distinctive leaf shape is your palmate leaves, shaped like a palm, often with 5 lobes. Okay, now sycamore, you know, it tends to be the common one that we see. Horse chestnut, mentioned before, we're not going to look at, quite distinctive leaf, and of course you've got the conkers as well, right? The one that normally is confused with sycamore is maple, and these are very similar species, both from North America. But actually, when you place the leaves together, you'll see that actually they are quite distinctive. Maples having a lot sharper leaf tips and more lobed. So you can see there, quite distinctive. And then oval leaves, probably more a kind of common leaf shape. But then again, if you look at it, you know, things that might look similar initially, actually, when you look at it in detail, there are great distinctions to be made. The things that pick out a leaf, you know, are its size, whether it's serrated, does it have a jaggy edge or not, the veining, okay, and just the feel. Some leaves are downy, so feel them, you know, don't just look, but feel as well. That's another important sort of aspect of ID. With the species we're going to look at today, really the only oval shaped leaves are your beech and your willows. I mentioned hazel before that we're not going to look at in too much detail, but you can see together they're all pretty distinctive, even though they're oval. And remember that flowers, as I said before, do produce flowers. Sorry, trees do produce flowers, okay? So be looking in the springtime. Some are tiny, some are literally, you know, millimeters or less, but some are quite vibrant and obvious. It's also important to start thinking about the ecology. Okay, how trees survive. How do plants generally survive and spread and reproduce? Now it's all about getting those seeds out into the environment. Now, if you think about it, the pioneers like and favour open ground. So they've got the benefit of wind, okay, to well help pollination, but also to be spreading their seed. So that has dictated the sort of form of the seed typically that pioneers will have, whereas high forest species don't have that benefit, if you like. They're sheltered within a forest. But of course, they do have a lot of mammals and other creatures that will be living in the forest that they can use to help. So again, they've evolved to utilise what's around them, and as well use sort of clever propellants to help spread that seed. So that tells you a lot about the type of tree we're looking at. So the pioneers will typically have catkins. These are the sort of dangly little seed pods that you will see. So your willows and your birches and your alders, your pioneer species, will all have catkins that look quite similar. There are distinctions to be made when you get your eye in. And alders will eventually, the female catkins will eventually mature to produce these cone-like structures. It's quite a unique form. Remember that you have male and female catkins, and they can be slightly different, but they're all of a similar form in terms of, long, sort of dangly lobes. Then your nut trees. Okay, so your high forest produces nuts for your mammals to then spread about, your squirrels and your mice, etc. And the two nut trees we're going to look at are your oaks and your beeches, acorns and beech nuts, and they're quite distinctive when you see them together. And of course your hazel bushes, we all like to eat hazelnut, well, many of us, I do. So that's your three kind of nut species. And the other high forest species that don't produce nuts cleverly use propellants. So if you see, wing type seeds, then it's a high forest species, and it's elm or sycamore or ash. Ash, we call them ash keys because they kind of dangle in a clump like keys. Sycamore helicopters, we all know as children we loved to chase about trying to catch these things, and elms are these sort of disc-shaped sort of wings. And the other way that trees the other method trees use to spread their seeds is of course with birds, and that's by producing tasty berries. So we have the rowans and the elders, very distinctive berries because one's red and one's black, so that's an easy one. And the hawthorns and the blackthorns, the other thorny species that we're not going to look at. And again, just the fact they've got thorns should tell you that. Okay, so pretty easy, if you see berries, it's going to be one of those two. So I'm now going to go look at the individual species and try and pick out distinctive features that will help tell you straight away, right, that's that. So what makes them special? And of course, that's the word special, the name species comes from the word special. So let's start with the high forest species, ash. And sometimes, and I don't want to confuse you, and complicate matters, but the Latin, the scientific name, can tell you a lot about the species. That's why you have such names. And the Latin high ash. It's called high ash because it's often the tallest tree in the forest, in the native woodland. But the name ash, to me, is a very easy one as a memory stimulus because, well, first of all, ash is a great firewood, right? It also has ashy coloured bark. Okay, so a grey bark and sooty black buds, as well as the twigs are quite knobbly. Okay, that's another kind of feature. And then, like I said before, you have these ash keys, the seeds. So let's have a wee look. Now, like I said before, tree features can change with age, which is blooming confusing. I mean, look at the contrast here between a young ash and an old ash. And that's why I don't really want to focus too much on certain features that are just going to complicate you. You want to look at one or two at the minimum really distinctive features to pick out a tree. So black buds, okay, ash, think fire, right? Also, ash dieback is a really serious issue in this area, okay, and it's spreading. So if you see trees, you know, that look like a fire's ripped through them, you know, that could be an ash. And to me, the bark almost looks like it's been desiccated as well when it gets to that old age. So, you know, and even the leaves, you know, I've just drawn this on for a bit of fun, but, you know, think little flames, you know, anything to stimulate your memory. And in terms of tree form at this time of year, you get these knobbly, not very sort of, how would you say, elegant form, you know, these sort of stubbly, crinkly, knobbly twigs. Okay. Moving on, oak. Right, the strong oak. Okay, and the Scots word is ache. Okay, and I think that you could use that, think acorn, ache, you know. Now, we also say that the oak is, you know, a big old tree, and sure it is, you know, it's the king of the forest, was known as. So think big fat old king, big spreading, tough old tree. Okay, and of course, you know, the kings of the past built their sailing ships with oak timber, you know, there's an association there. But also, if you look carefully, the buds are quite distinctive. This cluster of buds rather than a single bud. Now, you could argue that looks like a crown, perhaps. Don't know, I think so. And you've got the acorns as well, which in some respects almost mimic the buds, if you like, in at a certain angle. And the oak leaf is very distinctive. I mean, it's used in so many logos and symbols, you know, in this country, with these kind of this lobed effect. And here we have the oak's form. Now, here's a typical spreading oak. These huge, thick lateral branches. I mean, the lateral stresses must be massive. Of course, they are prone to crack, fall off now and again, which is a feature of oaks. So big, spreading, the king of the forest. Also, oaks tend to hold their leaves for quite a long time. So even a young oak, you know, in a plantation, you know, at this time of year, this is up Muirshiel, you'll see these oaks with the leaves still on, whereas a lot of trees are completely bare. So that's another kind of characteristic. And you'll be able to then look at the leaf shape, even though it's sort of crinkled up. So the other high forest species, elm. Wych elm is a Scots species rather than English elm. But of course, Dutch elm disease, it's suffered terribly, and we've lost most of our mature elms. So you're probably not looking for ancient elm trees, but it is actually common because it reaches an age where it can still flower and produce seed. So elms actually has become quite a kind of bushy, sort of short-lived small tree that you find along hedgerows and in the edges of woodlands and throughout woodlands. Now, the elm's leaf is very rough and highly toothed. Okay, and this is a characteristic of the elm. The feature that best distinguishes the elm is this asymmetry at the base of the leaf. Okay, key point to make. That alone will tell you it's an elm. Okay. Now the word witch actually comes. It's nothing to do with witches. You know, it actually means it's about the pliancy of the wood and how often it has a natural bend. And people used to exploit this by making shinty sticks and bows. So it's a kind of bendy, uneven kind of wood, if you like. So I've just drawn on, just from memory, you know, for your memory, these shinty sticks. And to me, the profile of the leaf is actually quite nicely picked out, you know, in the form of the shinty stick. So think bend or asymmetry, you know, together. I think there's, you know, maybe a connection there. And you've got your winged seeds that I covered before. And you know, there's the elm flower there, maybe not that distinctive. So bendy and asymmetry, right? Elm, right? And beech, now that's your introduced species, but very common now, so it's here. And it was known as the Queen of the Woods, unlike the oak being king. But it's very distinctive from the oak, very, very different, and it's kind of it stands out with a lot of unique features, okay? So you should find it relatively easy to distinguish a beech, okay? Shiny leaves, and they're often held through the winter as well, like the oak. There's a copper beech, which is a kind of different cultivar again, often crimson leaves, but in actual fact, the autumn leaves are copper colour. So you've either a very bright green glossy leaf in summer or this really beautiful copper in winter. Beech nuts, I mentioned before, high forestry, squirrels, but unlike the ash and the oak, I didn't mention the bark of the oak, but the beech is a really smooth bark, and this is the thing that sets it apart, okay? The smooth bark, and you've got this crisscross pattern on the buds, okay? But the thing of all that characterizes the beech is the fact that these leaves, which hang on the tree, okay, then fall, and they don't really decay too fast, okay, so you always have this really thick leaf litter beneath the trees. So I like to think of it as like a beech. It's a beech of leaves, okay. I mean, it's also a floral desert because very little will grow under a beech forest. So it's not great ecologically. You could also say that there's not even a ripple, you know, on the bark. Okay, so think smooth sand, beach, you know. Sycamore, your other introduced North American tree, very common. In fact, it can grow like a weed. So perhaps you might be sick of seeing more of it. Think palm-shaped leaf, okay? Let's try and catch a helicopter, okay? So make that connection, helicopters, palm-shaped leaf, okay? The other thing to consider is the bark, plates, okay? That sets it apart with some more aged trees. And the buds are actually quite unique because they're actually green buds right through the winter, not just before leaf burst. Okay, green buds. Often quite a robust tree, quite a spreading, thick, large girth tree, quite fast growing, and we'll go to an old age. You'll see lots of large sycamores about here, through the hedgerows as well as within woodland. Okay. Now we're on to the pioneers, okay. So the first one's rowan, the mountain ash. Now if you know your Gaelic, rowan comes from Ard Rua, so that means red, the Ruan, the red one. Let's like the name Rory. Okay, so red distinguishes the rowan. I also like to think, play in words, think round for rowan, okay? Just think round. Because to me, it's got a round form, okay? Highly densely branched, you know, that's to protect it from the wind out on the hill, okay? This really tight branching, small, squat tree, okay? But also the clumps of flowers. Now, of course, any tree that produces berries produces blossom, okay? They go together. So in the spring, blossom, in the autumn, berries. And there's quite a kind of rounded shape of flower cluster, okay, and then your round berries in the autumn, which you can produce lovely rowan berry jelly from. Excuse my phone. The other very distinctive feature of rowan is furry buds, okay, so I like to think, well, that's to keep the buds warm because it's out on the hill in the cold, up high, okay. So round and red, okay, is rowan, right? And then alder. Remember, that's your wet-loving tree, your tough pioneer. They actually used to build piers out of alderwood because it's very rot resistant when it gets wet. They're a kind of small, gnarly, tough tree. To me, they look like just a tough tree that will grow anywhere, you know. They might look older than they really are. Racket-shaped leaves, okay. But to me, the most characteristic feature, there are two, is the cone-shaped catkins. Remember pioneer, catkins, wind, but the catkins mature to form these kind of little cone-shaped. Now, most conifers have cones, right? But it's the only deciduous tree that loses leaves that has a cone. And purple buds. Okay, you see a purple bud, it's an alder. So those are the two most characteristic features. But remember, if it's growing in a really damp, wet place, and it's not just a kind of small bush like a willow, it's probably an alder, okay? Covered in lichens and mosses. Birch, your other key pioneer, very different again, you know, fast-growing, vigorous. But to me, birch is it's all about the colour, okay? Very distinctive, beautiful tree, you know, it's got this white bark, often peeling. You can make birch paper, you may have heard of that. Red twigs, because from a distance you really can pick out birch because it's a lovely red colour with this white slender stems. Okay, so red and white together. There's your catkins again. And it's a kind of triangular leaf, unlike all the other leaf shapes that we've seen, triangular, okay. So quite distinctive. Out in the open, colonising, you know, being a pioneer. And maybe other associations, well, what kind of, you used to put birch, well, you used to make kind of brooms with it, birch bisms, right? So with the really fine twigs. And the form of birch is quite an elegant tree with these fine fronds of branches. Think back to comparing that to the ash. You know, if you're walking along the cycle track and you look up, these fronds will be the birch. And think broom, right? Birch bism. The pendulous form of birch, that's your silver birch. These branches hang down. The Latin betula pendula, pendulous. Okay, but downy birch, slightly furry leaves. Very difficult to distinguish the two. Don't get worried. And a bit of fun, but you know, let's combine all those things because what another use of birches, of course, in the days of corporal punishment, you would get a good birching, you would say. So, warning, right? Triangular leaves, red and white colour, and maybe get a red and white bottom as well by when you get whipped with your birch twigs, okay? Willows, right. So, don't fret, there are 23 different native willow species, and even experts sometimes can't distinguish them. And they also hybridize, which is even worse. So, but focus on the most common ones, okay? That's grey willow, goat willow, your osiers and your white willow and your crack willow, all to be found round here. The reserve in Loch Winner, brilliant place to look at willows. You've all these different forms and species. And also here, less commonly, bay willow, tea-leaved willow, dart-leaved willow, and the high-ground eared willow, okay? But don't worry about trying to characterise these at this stage, okay? Unless you've got a book, a very thick book. But the thing to consider about willows is all the common features that set them apart from other species, right? Now, they can be a bush or they can be quite a tall, slender tree, depending, right? But they've all got catkins. Think pussy willow, okay? You may have heard that term, right? These little fluffy catkins in spring. And then fluffy seeds, so think fluff, okay? And a willowy form as well. So often these windy, slender, willowy branches, okay? And the other key feature is diamonds, right, on the bark. Now, the only other species to have diamonds typically is aspen. It's kind of related, but different trees to look at. So, fluff diamonds, right? Pussy willow. So, to me, James Bond cat. Think them all together, right? So, but remember, cats hate water. Willows love water. Okay. It's a daft thing, but it might just help stimulate your memory. Okay. And although the willows are hugely distinctive, as you can see in these pictures, they all generally have a single leaf, generally not lobed, so generally oval or elongated oval, okay? Sometimes the sharp point, sometimes not, but you won't get leaflets or compound or palmate leaves. It's all that single leaf shape, right? The other thing to consider when you're going into more detail with plant identification, looking at twigs and branches, is whether buds are alternate or opposite. Okay, that's something you may go on to look at. Some willow leaves are downy, some are not, some are serrated, but all generally kind of oval single leaf, right? Elder. Now you're going on to your small bushes now. Found on the edge of the forest, in hedges, okay. Now, the obvious one about elder, what do we associate with elder? Yes, elderflower, cordial, wine, it's a drink, okay, and it's beautifully smelling. But unlike the rowan, that's a round clusters of blossom, elder has kind of these flat seed heads, okay, but just smell it, you know, and you'll straight away know, it's elder. And of course blackberries, so very distinctive from the rounds. These small scrubby bushes are up to small tree sort of size, okay. So, you know, you might start off thinking, I can't do this, you know, how do I start with tree ID? But you've seen that really there can be very distinctive. Pick out certain features and you'll be well on your way. And ultimately, you know, I've just covered, you know, 80–90% of the trees you're likely to see just going a walk. There's a whole other 20 species, but those will be much, much rarer, you know, and then you can get the book out and help you, okay? So, as I said, get involved. You know, the more you're out working with trees, looking at them, the better. And of course, we do a lot of tree planting as well, and that's another way to kind of get your eye in. And of course, we run lots of volunteering opportunities. You can get still involved in the Growing for Garnet project, or you know, come out with us, and that's basically what we do. It's our bread and butter, out planting new woodlands, tree planting right across the sort of west of Scotland. So join in the fun, and yeah, that will help you on your way with the identification too.